I said I would take you to work in the city. Why are you still dressed like this? And you smell bad. The words, sharp and laced with disdain, hung in the humid morning air. Xiaoya's fingers tightened around the worn strap of her bag, the coarse fabric a familiar comfort in this sudden surge of unease. She lowered her head, the brim of her straw hat hiding the flicker of hurt in her eyes. He promised a job, a chance to escape, but at what cost? She thought, the smell of pig feed clinging to her like a second skin. He acts as if I chose this life, as if I haven't scrubbed myself raw trying to get rid of this smell. She had imagined the city as a place of gleaming towers and endless opportunities, a stark contrast to the mud and manure of her farm. This was not the welcome she had envisioned. She glanced down at her patched trousers and faded shirt, her usual attire for tending to her pigs. These clothes, once symbols of her hard work and self-sufficiency, now felt like marks of shame. I didn't have anything else, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the chirping of crickets. A bitter taste rose in her throat. I should have known it wouldn't be this easy. The city, with its dazzling lights and sophisticated whispers, seemed a world away from the simplicity of her rural life. She had dreamt of leaving, of escaping the suffocating weight of her family's expectations, but this felt like trading one cage for another. A sigh, heavy with impatience, broke the silence. Fine. I'll get you some clothes later. Just try not to contaminate the car. The word stung, each syllable a pointed reminder of the chasm that separated her from this world. Xiaoya swallowed the lump in her throat, her resolve hardening. Contaminate? I'll show him. I may smell of pigs, but my heart is cleaner than his. She climbed into the back of the dusty jeep, the vinyl seat sticking uncomfortably to her skin. As the vehicle lurched forward, leaving behind the familiar landscape of her childhood, a mixture of trepidation and anticipation coiled in her stomach. The city was a labyrinth, a place of unknown dangers and hidden opportunities. She clutched her bag tighter, her fingers tracing the worn embroidery of a single, defiant sunflower. The sprawling metropolis unfolded before her, a tapestry of towering skyscrapers and bustling streets. The air, thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and unfamiliar spices, assaulted her senses. Xiaoya stared out the window, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. This was Jinheibeiyuan, the heart of the city, a place she had only glimpsed in magazines. The Jinheibeiyuan Hotel, its facade gleaming like a polished jewel, stood as a testament to the city's opulence. Xiaoya's breath hitched in her throat. It was grander, more intimidating than she could have ever imagined. Inside, the hotel lobby was a whirlwind of activity. Elegant figures in designer clothes glided across the polished marble floor, their conversations a low murmur of hushed whispers and polite laughter. Xiaoya felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The sheer scale of the place, the unfamiliar sense of expensive perfumes and freshly brewed coffee, the sheer indifference of the people around her, it was overwhelming. I don't belong here, she thought, her heart pounding against her ribs. I'm a farmer, not a lady. Stay close, the man's voice cut through her thoughts, laced with a warning. Xiaoya flinched, her shoulders tightening. As if I could get lost in this crowd. She trailed behind him, her eyes darting nervously from one face to another. Each glance seemed to confirm her fears, each whispered conversation a potential source of judgment. She felt like a stray animal, caught in the headlights of a speeding car. The sudden appearance of a woman, her face contorted in a mask of displeasure, further fueled Xiaoya's anxiety. Zhao Jinfeng, her name was, and the venom in her gaze was palpable. What is she doing here? Jinfeng demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. And why does she smell like that? Xiaoya recoiled, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She doesn't even know me, and she already hates me, she thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. The humiliation burned, hot and sharp, a stark contrast to the cool air of the air-conditioned lobby. I'm not dirt. I work hard. I'm worth something. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. She's an assistant, the man beside her responded, his tone hesitant, almost apologetic. Xiaoya's jaw tightened. Assistant? Is that all I am? She stole a glance at him, her eyes searching his face for a hint of understanding, a flicker of empathy. But his gaze was fixed on Jin Feng, his expression carefully neutral. He's ashamed of me, she realized, a cold knot forming in her stomach. He brought me here, but he's ashamed of me. An assistant? Jin Feng's voice dripped with disbelief. She looks like she just crawled out of a pigsty. The cruel laughter that followed sent a shiver down Xiaoya's spine. Pigsty. That's all they see. That's all I'll ever be to them. The words echoed in her mind, each syllable a hammer blow against her fragile sense of self-worth. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the polished marble floor and become invisible. A young woman in a crisp hotel uniform, Gao Peipei, approached them, her face a mask of professional courtesy. Yet, beneath the veneer of politeness, Xiaoya detected a flicker of amusement, a subtle hint of disdain. Is there a problem, Miss Xiao? Peipei inquired, her eyes darting between Jin Feng and Xiaoya. A problem? This peasant is contaminating the entire lobby, Jin Feng declared, her voice dripping with contempt. Get her out of here. Xiaoya felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Peasant. Contaminating. As if I'm a disease. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to remain calm, to maintain a semblance of composure in the face of this relentless assault. I won't let them see me break. I won't give them the satisfaction. Peipei's gaze lingered on Xiaoya for a moment, her expression unreadable. I understand, Miss Xiao, she said smoothly. We'll take care of it. The words, though polite, held an underlying threat, a promise of further humiliation. Xiaoya braced herself, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. The city, she realized, was not the haven she had hoped for. It was a battlefield, and she was unarmed. But even unarmed, even humiliated, she would not surrender. She would find a way to survive, to thrive, to prove them all wrong. The sunflower on her bag seemed to pulse with a faint, defiant energy. I'll bloom here, she thought, a flicker of determination igniting in her heart. Even in this concrete jungle, I'll find a way to bloom. The cool air, scented faintly with lilies and something indefinably expensive, washed over Xiaoya as the elevator doors slid open. She'd never seen anything like it. Gleaming marble floors stretched out like an Arctic plain, reflecting the dazzling light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. Her worn canvas shoes suddenly felt absurdly out of place. A pig farmer in a palace, she thought wryly, tugging at the hem of her simple blouse. The sudden shift from the bustling, earthy chaos of her farm to this pristine, almost sterile environment was disorienting. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a peculiar blend of awe and anxiety. She swallowed, trying to ignore the churning in her stomach. A sharply dressed woman, her smile as polished as the marble floor, approached. Miss Wen, she inquired, her voice smooth as silk. Xiaoya nodded, clutching her small, worn bag tighter. Mr. Hua is waiting for you. The woman, who introduced herself as Gao Peipei, led her down a seemingly endless corridor, the click of Xiaoya's shoes echoing strangely in the vast, quiet space. Each office they passed was a testament to wealth and power, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing breathtaking views of the city sprawling below. Xiaoya felt a strange mix of fascination and intimidation. This was a world she had only glimpsed from afar, a world that seemed to operate on a different set of rules. How am I supposed to fit in here? She wondered, her heart beating a nervous tattoo against her ribs. They finally stopped before a set of imposing double doors. Pepe knocked lightly, then pushed them open, revealing an office even more opulent than the ones they had passed. Sunlight streamed through a panoramic window, illuminating the rich mahogany desk and the figure seated behind it. Hui Yansheng. Even from a distance, she could sense his power, the air of authority that clung to him like an expensive cologne. Mr. Hua, Miss Wen is here, Pepe announced, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. Xiaoya felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear, exactly, but something akin to it, a strange awareness of the vast chasm that separated their worlds. He gestured towards a pair of chairs facing his desk. Please, have a seat. His voice was deep and resonant, commanding attention without raising its volume. As Xiaoya sat, she became acutely aware of her every move, every breath. The plush leather of the chair felt unfamiliar beneath her. She smoothed her skirt nervously, wishing she had at least had time to change out of her farm clothes. At that moment, another woman entered the office. Tall, elegant, with an air of sophisticated confidence, she moved with the grace of a seasoned predator. Her smile, directed at Hui Yansheng, was dazzling, but when her eyes fell on Xiaoya, a subtle chill entered the room. Yansheng, darling, I didn't realize you had a guest, she purred, her voice laced with a sweetness that felt distinctly artificial to Xiaoya's ears. Hui Yansheng introduced them. Xiaoya, this is Zhao Jinfeng, our head of public relations. Jinfeng, this is Wen Xiaoya. Jinfeng's smile tightened fractionally. A pleasure, she said, her gaze sweeping over Xiaoya with a barely disguised disdain. She doesn't like me, Xiaoya realized, a knot tightening in her stomach. And she doesn't bother to hide it. It wasn't paranoia, she'd seen that look before, in the eyes of the women in her village who envied her prize-winning pigs. Only this time, the stakes seemed much higher. Jinfeng was just explaining the importance of image, Hui Yansheng continued, his tone neutral, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents swirling between the two women. Especially for those representing the Hua group. Jinfeng's smile returned, full force. Indeed, she said, turning her attention back to Xiaoya. You see, Miss Wen, being associated with the Hua group comes with certain responsibilities. It's not just about business, it's about lifestyle. Leisure and accommodation, so your every move represents the face of the Hua group. She emphasized the last few words, her eyes glinting with something that looked suspiciously like triumph. Xiaoya's mind raced. Leisure and accommodation. What did that even mean? Was she expected to become some sort of socialite overnight? The thought filled her with a creeping dread. She had spent her life knee-deep in mud, tending to her pigs. The intricacies of high society were as foreign to her as the constellations in the night sky. I understand, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She could feel Jinfeng's gaze boring into her, dissecting her simple clothes, her unpolished appearance. She's enjoying this, Xiaoya realized with a sudden flash of anger. She wants to see me fail. The realization ignited a spark of defiance within her. She might not fit into this world of polished marble and designer suits, but she wasn't going to let this woman intimidate her. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. I'll do my best to learn. Hui Yansheng watched the exchange, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He seemed to sense the unspoken tension between the two women, the silent battle being waged beneath the veneer of polite conversation. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I have no doubt you will, he said, his gaze settling on Xiaoya with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. The words were simple, but there was something in his tone, a hint of something deeper, that sent a wave of warmth through her, a strange reassurance in the face of Jinfeng's thinly veiled hostility. The city, this world, might be unfamiliar and intimidating, but she had a feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated, and perhaps, a lot more interesting. The opulent lobby of the Jinhe Baiyuan Hotel shimmered under the crystalline chandeliers, a dizzying display of wealth and extravagance that made Wen Xiaoya's simple cotton dress feel like a burlap sack. She clutched the flimsy plastic bag containing the takeout container, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy knot in her stomach. This city, this hotel, it was all so alien. Back home, the pungent aroma of pig feed was her perfume, the rhythmic grunting of her pigs her symphony. Here, the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of expensive perfumes and the hushed murmur of polite conversation, a language she hadn't yet learned. The receptionist, a woman whose smile seemed permanently etched onto her face, pointed towards the elevators. Room 999, Mississippi. Xiaoya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. 999. The number echoed in her mind, a string of nines that felt as unattainable as the stars. As the elevator ascended, a strange premonition washed over her. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a deep unease, a sense of being watched, of being a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The hallway on the 99th floor was a hushed sanctuary of thick carpets and closed doors. Each door seemed to exude an aura of power and secrecy, making Xiaoya's mission feel increasingly absurd. She found room 999 and hesitated before knocking. What if this was all a mistake? What if she wasn't supposed to be here? But it was too late to turn back. A gruff voice barked from inside, "Come in." Xiaoya pushed the door open, her heart pounding against her ribs. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and something else, something sickly sweet. A man, his face flushed and his tie askew, sat slumped on the sofa, his eyes glazed over. He wasn't the person she was expecting. He looked at her with a disconcerting intensity, his gaze lingering on her face, then slowly traveling down her body. "To have a stomachache," he mumbled, his words slurred. Xiaoya's unease intensified. This wasn't right. Had she come to the wrong room? She fumbled for the delivery slip, her fingers trembling slightly. "I have a takeaway order for room 999. The man chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. 999. This is 666. But you can stay. He reached out a hand towards her, his fingers grasping at the air. Panic clawed at Xiaoya's throat. She stumbled back, the plastic bag rustling in her grip. I have the wrong room." She turned to flee, but the man lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Don't go," he slurred, his breath hot against her ear. "I'm wondering why I'm suddenly so hot I have no strength." His grip tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh. Xiaoya struggled against him, her mind racing. She needed to get out, to escape this suffocating room, this man's predatory gaze. In the ensuing struggle, the jade pendant she wore, a cherished gift from her grandmother, slipped from its chain and fell unnoticed to the floor. Meanwhile, Zhao Jinfeng watched from the shadows, a smug smile playing on her lips. This was even better than she had anticipated. The naive little pig farmer, stumbling into the lion's den. She had orchestrated this little drama, switching the room numbers, knowing exactly what kind of man occupied room 666. This would be the perfect way to discredit Xiaoya, to expose her as the unsophisticated, unsuitable impostor she was. Gao Peipei, the hotel employee, hovered nervously beside Jinfeng, her eyes darting back and forth. She hadn't anticipated things escalating so quickly. This was more than just a harmless prank. She cleared her throat, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Miss Xiao, are you sure this is wise?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the muffled sounds coming from room 666. Jean Feng shot her a venomous look. "Don't question me, Gao Peipei. Just do as you're told." Her voice was laced with ice. This was her moment of triumph, and she wouldn't let anyone, not even a hesitant accomplice, ruin it. Inside room 666, Xiaoya's heart hammered against her ribs. Fear, raw and visceral, coursed through her veins. She kicked and scratched, desperate to break free from the man's grasp. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice hoarse. The man's grip tightened, his eyes glittering with a dangerous mixture of lust and confusion. Just when she thought she couldn't bear it any longer, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" Hui Yanqing stood in the doorway, his face impassive, his eyes scanning the scene with a chilling intensity. The man in the room froze, his grip loosening slightly. Xiaoya seized the opportunity, wrenching herself free and stumbling towards the door. She didn't look back, her mind consumed by the single, overwhelming desire to escape. Hui Yanqing's gaze followed her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He turned to the man on the sofa, his voice dangerously low. "Explain yourself." The room temperature seemed to plummet, the air thick with unspoken menace. The man stammered, his words a jumbled mess of excuses and denials. Hui Yanqing listened, his expression unchanging, his silence more terrifying than any outburst. As Xiaoya fled down the hallway, her breath catching in her throat, she couldn't shake the image of Hui Yanqing's face. His unexpected appearance had been her salvation, but it had also left her with a strange, unsettling feeling. Who was this man, this powerful, enigmatic figure who seemed to command the very air she breathed? And why did she feel a flicker of something in his eyes as he watched her leave? She clutched her chest, her fingers brushing against the bare skin where her jade pendant had been. Its loss, a small, sharp pang of grief in the midst of the chaos. She had lost more than a piece of jewelry, she had lost a piece of her past, a tangible link to the life she had left behind. And as she disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the hotel, she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The opulent elevator of the Jinhei Beiyuan Hotel, a cage of polished steel and mirrored surfaces, felt less like a conveyance and more like a judgmental gaze. Xiaoya clutched her worn handbag, the rough fabric a stark contrast to the smooth coolness of the handrail. Each chime announcing a passing floor reverberated through her, an echo of her own unease. Just moments ago, she'd been elbow-deep in the familiar muck of her pigpens, the pungent scent of manure clinging to her clothes like a stubborn memory. Now, surrounded by the hushed whispers of wealth and the faint aroma of expensive perfume, she felt like an intruder, a misplaced piece in a meticulously arranged puzzle. Hui Yanqing stood beside her, a silent monolith of power and composure. His tailored suit, the subtle glint of his watch, the effortless way he commanded the space, everything about him screamed of a world she barely understood. He hadn't spoken since their brief exchange by the entrance, but his presence filled the confined space, a constant, almost oppressive weight. Xiaoya stole a glance at his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the focused intensity in his eyes. "He probably thinks I'm a complete idiot," she thought miserably, the memory of her clumsy stumble still burning in her cheeks. A pig farmer in a 5-star hotel. What was I thinking? The elevator lurched unexpectedly, a violent shudder that threw Xiaoya off balance. For a heart-stopping moment, she was suspended in mid-air, her hand instinctively reaching for the nearest support, which happened to be Hui Yanqing's arm. The contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt of electricity through her. She recoiled as if burned, her face flushing crimson. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Idiot, idiot, idiot," her inner voice shrieked. "Could you be any more awkward?" Hui Yanqing steadied himself, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Before Xiaoya could answer, the lights flickered and died, plunging the elevator into darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the other occupants. The elevator car swayed precariously, then ground to a halt, the silence broken only by the whirring of stalled machinery. Panic tightened its icy grip around Xiaoya's chest. The confined space, the sudden darkness, the unsettling stillness, it all felt suffocating. "This can't be happening," she thought, her breath catching in her throat. "I need to get out of here." The emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the mirrored walls. The other passengers, a mix of hotel guests and staff, began to murmur amongst themselves, their voices laced with anxiety. Hui Yanqing remained remarkably calm, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He pulled out his phone, the glow illuminating his face, and began to make a call. Xiaoya watched him, a strange mix of fear and fascination swirling within her. "He's so in control," she thought, a flicker of admiration piercing through her panic. "He's not even fazed." News of the elevator malfunction spread through the hotel like wildfire. By the time the doors were finally pried open, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Zhao Jinfeng, resplendent in a designer dress, stood at the forefront, her eyes fixed on Xiaoya with a mixture of triumph and malice. Beside her, Gao Peipei, the hotel employee, whispered something in her ear, her expression a carefully crafted blend of sympathy and subtle gloating. "What a dreadful experience," Jinfeng said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Are you all right, Miss Wen, was it?" Xiaoya, still shaken from the ordeal, nodded curtly, her gaze fixed on the floor. She could feel Jinfeng's eyes boring into her, like needles probing for weakness. "Such a strange coincidence, don't you think?" Jinfeng continued, her voice laced with insinuation. "The elevator malfunctions just moments after she boards." The murmurs around them intensified, taking on a sharper, more accusatory edge. Xiaoya felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "She's doing this on purpose," she realized, a cold dread settling in her stomach. "She's trying to frame me." "What are you implying?" Hui Yanqing's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the whispers. He turned to face Jinfeng, his eyes like chips of ice. Jinfeng flinched, but quickly recovered her composure. "Nothing, mister." "Hua," she said smoothly. "Just a curious observation." Later, in the hushed confines of a hotel office, the accusations flew thick and fast. Gao Peipei, coached by Jinfeng, claimed to have seen Xiaoya tampering with the elevator controls. Other staff members, eager to please Jinfeng and curry favor with Hui Yanqing, chimed in with their own fabricated accounts, their whispers weaving a web of lies around Xiaoya. "What's wrong with being a farmer?" Xiaoya's voice, though trembling, held a surprising strength. "Does that make me a criminal?" Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hushed whispers and veiled accusations. She looked at the faces around her, the masks of politeness and propriety barely concealing the disdain and suspicion beneath. "They think they're better than me," she thought, a surge of anger coursing through her veins. "Just because I don't wear fancy clothes or speak their fancy language doesn't mean I'm stupid." The whispers, however, continued, growing bolder, more explicit. "Could Wen Xiaoyan have slept with Mr. Hua?" The venomous question hung in the air, fueled by Jinfeng's carefully planted seeds of doubt. Hui Yanqing's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Xiaoya felt a strange mix of anger and something else. A flicker of protectiveness, perhaps. Or was it simply pity? Jinfeng watched the scene unfold, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "That woman," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, yet filled with venom. I want her. The words were not directed at anyone in particular, but hung in the air, a chilling promise of retribution. The trap had been set. The game had begun. The opulent Jinhaebaiyuan Hotel shimmered under the city lights, its glass facade reflecting a distorted image of the bustling metropolis. Inside, Wen Xiaoya, dressed in borrowed clothes that felt both restrictive and alien, navigated the plush carpets with a caution bordering on paranoia. Each step echoed the unsettling dissonance between her simple life and this world of marble and chandeliers. Don't trip, Xiaoya, don't trip. Just get through this and get back to the farm, she repeated internally, her hands clammy despite the cool air conditioning. The scent of lilies, overpowering and unfamiliar, assaulted her senses, a stark contrast to the earthy aromas of her everyday life. She clutched the small, worn purse, a stark contrast to the designer handbags clutched by the women gliding past her, feeling like an imposter in a play she hadn't auditioned for. Hui Yansheng, his presence commanding even in silence, stood by the panoramic window of his suite, the city lights casting long shadows across his sharp features. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly, a counterpoint to the cacophony of his thoughts. The unexpected encounter with the pig farmer, Wen Xiaoya, had left a lingering impression. Her unrefined demeanor, her clumsy navigation of his world, was strangely intriguing. He swirled the whiskey, the aroma sharp and familiar, yet it couldn't dispel the lingering scent of pigs. Absurd, he thought, a flicker of amusement in his usually stoic eyes. The smell on this woman is so familiar across the hotel, Zhao Jinfeng fumed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palm. Xiaoya's presence, her mere existence in this space, felt like a personal affront. That little bumpkin, what does she think she's doing here? Jinfeng's gaze narrowed as she watched Xiaoya from afar, her mind already churning with plans to expose her and send her back to the obscurity she belonged in. She beckoned Gao Peipei, the hotel employee whose eagerness to please bordered on servile. A whispered conversation, a conspiratorial glance, and a plan began to take shape, designed to humiliate Xiaoya and solidify Jinfeng's position in Hui Yansheng's world. Xiaoya, meanwhile, found herself lost in the labyrinthine corridors of the hotel. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the familiar confines of her farm. Each turn seemed to lead to another identical hallway, lined with doors that all looked the same. This place is a maze, she thought, her anxiety rising. I'll never find my way back. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her, she bumped into a solid figure. Oh, excuse me, she stammered, her cheeks flushing crimson. It was Hui Yansheng. His gaze, sharp and assessing, swept over her, taking in her flustered appearance, the slight tremor in her hands. Lost? He asked, his voice a low rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. A little, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He remembers me. He actually remembers me. The thought, both surprising and slightly terrifying, sent her heart racing. He gestured down the corridor. The main lobby is that way. His words were curt, yet there was a subtle softening in his eyes that didn't escape Xiaoya's notice. Thank you, she murmured, dipping her head in a gesture of gratitude, and hurried away, relieved to have escaped the intensity of his gaze. Why does this man make me so nervous? She wondered, her heart still pounding against her ribs. Back in his suite, Hui Yansheng watched her retreating figure, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He lifted his glass to his lips, taking a slow sip of the whiskey. The lingering scent of pigs, faint yet persistent, continued to puzzle him. You touched a woman. The thought surfaced unbidden, a memory of a different time, a different place. He frowned, trying to grasp the elusive connection. Why does this woman always give me an inexplicable sense of familiarity? Later that evening, as Xiaoya finally made her way back to her temporary room, a sense of unease settled over her. The opulent surroundings, the unfamiliar faces, the constant feeling of being watched, it was all too much. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it as if to shut out the intruding world. Just a little longer, Xiaoya, she told herself. Just a little longer. A knock on the door startled her. It was Gao Peipei, holding a tray laden with food. "Mr. Hua sent this up for you," she said, her smile saccharine sweet. Xiaoya hesitated, suspicion prickling her skin. Why would Hua Yanqing send me food? She took the tray, her mind racing. "Thank you," she said, her voice laced with caution. As Peipei turned to leave, a small, almost imperceptible smirk played on her lips. The plan was in motion. Alone in the room, Xiaoya stared at the food, her appetite gone. Something felt wrong. Too wrong. She decided to trust her instincts, a decision honed by years of dealing with unpredictable livestock. Instead of eating, she carefully examined the contents of the tray. A glint of metal caught her eye. Hidden beneath a slice of bread, she found a small, intricately designed hairpin, a hairpin she recognized as belonging to Zhao Jinfeng. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This is a setup. Jinfeng's plan, orchestrated with Peipei's assistance, was to plant the hairpin amongst Xiaoya's belongings, then discover it later, accusing her of theft and creating a scandal that would undoubtedly ruin her. It was a crude but effective tactic, designed to exploit Xiaoya's naivety and unfamiliarity with the social dynamics of this world. But Xiaoya was not as naive as they assumed. She picked up the hairpin, her fingers tracing its delicate curves. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that held no trace of the earlier awkwardness. Two can play this game, she thought, her mind already formulating a counter-strategy. The city lights, reflecting off the hairpin, seemed to glint with a newfound determination. The game, she realized, had just begun. The opulent lobby of the Jinhe Beiyuan Hotel shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of lilies and the hushed murmur of affluent conversations. When Xiaoya, however, felt acutely out of place. Her simple cotton dress, a stark contrast to the designer gowns swirling around her, clung uncomfortably. She fidgeted with the strap of her worn bag, a knot tightening in her stomach. Just breathe, Xiaoya, she told herself, it's just a hotel, not a dragon's lair. But the sheer extravagance of the place, the intimidating stares of the impeccably dressed guests, made her feel like a stray piglet in a palace ballroom. She made her way to the temporary living quarters assigned to her, a small but surprisingly comfortable room tucked away from the main bustle. The sudden quiet was a welcome reprieve. Closing the door behind her, she leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind, a chaotic blend of unfamiliar faces, whispered accusations, and a growing unease that settled deep within her bones. She had come to the city expecting a simple transaction, a quick exchange that would allow her to return to the familiar comfort of her pig farm. Instead, she found herself entangled in a web of intrigue, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. A sharp knock startled her. It was Gao Peipei, the hotel employee who had been assigned to assist her. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Peipei's face, a blend of pity and veiled contempt that made Xiaoya's apprehension spike. "Mr. Hua would like to see you," Peipei announced, her voice smooth and professional, yet lacking any genuine warmth. Xiaoya's heart pounded against her ribs. Hua Yanqing. The name alone carried a weight, a power that resonated through the very walls of the hotel. He was a figure of legend, the CEO of the Hua Group, a man whose very presence commanded respect and fear. What could he possibly want with me? She wondered, a chill tracing its way down her spine. Now, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Now, Pepe confirmed, a subtle smirk playing on her lips. Hui Yanqing's office was a study in minimalist elegance, all sharp lines and cool, muted colors. He sat behind a vast mahogany desk, his gaze fixed on a document in his hand, seemingly oblivious to her entrance. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, amplifying the rapid beat of Xiaoya's heart. She felt a strange mix of intimidation and curiosity. He was even more imposing in person, his features sharp and defined, his aura radiating an almost tangible power. Finally, he looked up, his eyes, dark and inscrutable, meeting hers. "Miss Wan," he acknowledged, his voice low and resonant, sending a shiver down her spine. "There seems to be some confusion regarding last night's incident." Xiaoya's mind raced. The incident. Zhao Jinfeng's staged fall, the misplaced jade pendant, the whispers and accusations that had followed. "It's a trap," a voice screamed inside her head. "They're trying to frame you." "You don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "A valuable item went missing from my suite last night. It's a crescent-shaped jade pendant. Quite unique." He paused, his eyes boring into hers. "Who do you think entered my room last night, Miss Wan?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Xiaoya swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She knew what they wanted her to say. They wanted her to confess, to admit to a crime she hadn't committed. But something in Hui Yanqing's eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't quite hostility, gave her pause. Was he truly accusing her, or was he testing her? "You don't know," she finally managed, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I was in my room all night." A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "Are you sure about that, Miss Wan?" "Yes," she affirmed, meeting his gaze head-on. "I wouldn't steal anything." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he shifted in his chair, his voice softening slightly. "You need to think carefully, Miss Wan. The implications of this situation are significant." Xiaoya's mind reeled. She knew the risks, the dangers of being caught in this web of lies. But she also knew she couldn't back down. "I am thinking carefully, Mr. Hua," she replied, her voice steady now, the fear replaced by a nascent determination. "And I'm telling you the truth." He remained silent for a long moment, the tension in the room almost palpable. Then, he finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. I will look into this matter personally." As Xiaoya left his office, a strange sense of relief washed over her. She still felt the weight of suspicion, the precariousness of her situation. But something had shifted. Hui Yanqing's words, his demeanor, hinted at a doubt, a crack in the facade of certainty that Zhao Jinfeng and Gao Peipei had so carefully constructed. The game was far from over, but for the first time, Xiaoya felt a flicker of hope, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, she might be able to navigate this treacherous terrain and emerge unscathed. Back in her room, the city lights twinkling outside her window, she knew she had to be more vigilant, more careful. The feeling of being watched, of being a pawn, hadn't disappeared. But now, there was also a new awareness, a growing understanding of the forces at play, and a burgeoning resolve to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The simple pig farmer, it seemed, was more resilient than anyone had anticipated. The mud squelched beneath her worn rubber boots, a familiar symphony of the countryside. Xiaoya paused, her hand resting on the rough wooden fence of the pigpen. The city, with its gleaming towers and suffocating politeness, felt a lifetime away. Here, the air was thick with the scent of earth and animal feed, a stark contrast to the sterile perfume of Jinheibeiyuan. She closed her eyes, the image of Hu Yanqing's sharp, assessing gaze flickering behind her eyelids. He was an enigma wrapped in expensive suits, a man who seemed to see through the carefully constructed facade she presented to the world. A pig farmer, she thought, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was a lie, a necessary shield, yet it chafed against the reality of who she truly was. The memory of Zhao Jinfeng's sneering face flashed before her, the woman's words dripping with venom. A country bumpkin like you, trying to climb above your station. Xiaoya's fingers tightened around the fence post. The humiliation still burned, a slow simmering anger replacing the initial bewilderment. Jinfeng's petty attempts to sabotage her, the spilled wine, the whispered rumors, they were all pieces of a puzzle Xiaoya was only beginning to understand. It wasn't just about her, it was about Hu Yanqing, about the power and prestige that came with being close to him. As if I wanted any of that, Xiaoya scoffed internally, the thought laced with a strange mixture of defiance and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farmyard. Her grandmother's voice, weathered and wise, echoed in her memory. Patience, Xiaoya. Some truths are best revealed slowly, like the unfolding of a lotus blossom. The words had always been a comfort, a reminder that her current circumstances were temporary. But how much longer could she maintain this charade? How much longer could she hide the truth of her lineage, the weight of her family's legacy? The city lights blurred past the taxi window, a dizzying kaleidoscope of color and movement. Returning to Jinhei felt like stepping back into a lion's den, the air thick with unspoken tensions and veiled threats. Gao Peipei, the hotel employee, hovered near the entrance, her eyes flickering with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Xiaoya could sense the woman's internal struggle, the conflict between her own self-preservation and the desire to please those in power. Another pawn in Jinfeng's game, she thought, a flicker of weariness passing through her. Inside the opulent lobby, the air hummed with hushed conversations and the clinking of crystal glasses. Xiaoya felt a wave of dizziness, the stark contrast between her simple life and this world of extravagance almost overwhelming. She spotted Hu Yanqing across the room, his tall figure a beacon of calm amidst the swirling chaos. He was speaking with a group of men, his expression impassive, yet there was an intensity in his eyes that drew her in. For a fleeting moment, their gazes met, and a strange jolt of electricity passed between them. He excused himself from the group, his stride purposeful as he moved towards her. Xiaoya's heart pounded against her ribs, a mixture of apprehension and anticipation flooding her senses. What would he say? Would he confront her about the rumors, about her supposed incompetence? She straightened her simple dress, a nervous gesture that did little to ease the tension coiling in her stomach. He stopped before her, his gaze searching, intense. "Miss Wen," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "We need to talk." Xiaoya swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "About what?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He gestured towards a quieter corner of the lobby, his eyes never leaving hers. "About your background. About the rumors circulating." The blood drained from Xiaoya's face. This was it. The moment of truth. She followed him, her legs feeling like lead. As they settled into plush armchairs, the silence between them stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words. "I understand you're a pig farmer," Hu Yanqing began, his tone carefully neutral. "But there are whispers, suggestions that you're not who you claim to be." Xiaoya's hands clenched in her lap. The carefully constructed walls she had built around herself began to crumble, the weight of her secret threatening to suffocate her. She took a deep breath, the scent of expensive leather and subtle cologne filling her lungs. "It's now or never," she thought, a surge of defiance coursing through her veins. If you tell him I'm just a pig farmer, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Xiaoya met Hui Yanqing's gaze, her own eyes burning with a newfound intensity. That's because I am a pig farmer, she stated, her voice surprisingly steady. But that's not the whole story. She paused, the silence hanging heavy in the air. I'm also the eldest daughter of the Wen family. The words hung in the air, a bombshell dropped into the carefully orchestrated world of Jinhe Beiyuan. Hui Yanqing's expression remained unchanged, a mask of composure that gave nothing away. Yet, Xiaoya could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of surprise that flashed in his eyes before quickly being masked. The game had changed. The stakes were higher. And Xiaoya, the seemingly simple pig farmer, had just revealed her hand. The ripple effect of her words, she knew, would be far-reaching, touching not only her own life but the very foundations of the world she had so carefully avoided. The city lights outside seemed to shimmer, reflecting the uncertainty of the future, the unknown path that stretched before her. She had taken the first step, a leap of faith into the turbulent waters of her own destiny. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that there was no turning back. The opulent chandeliers of the Jinhe Beiyuan Hotel cast a shimmering light, refracting off the polished marble floors, a stark contrast to the mud-caked boots Xiaoya had hastily wiped on the ornate entry rug. She felt a prickle of unease, like a small animal caught in a gilded cage. Each breath she took seemed to echo the vastness of the lobby, amplifying her sense of displacement. This place, it's like another world, she thought, the scent of lilies and expensive perfume a heady mix that made her slightly dizzy. She clutched the worn leather strap of her satchel, her knuckles white, a small anchor in this sea of unfamiliar elegance. Across the lobby, Zhao Jinfeng watched with a smirk playing on her lips. The clumsy country bumpkin, dressed in ill-fitting clothes, was a pathetic sight. Jinfeng adjusted the diamond pendant at her throat, a cold satisfaction settling in her chest. Let her enjoy her brief moment of glory. It won't last. The plan was unfolding perfectly. Gao Peipei, the jittery hotel employee, had already planted the seeds of doubt about Xiaoya in the minds of the staff. A few whispered rumors, a misplaced item, a strategically spilled glass of wine. It wouldn't take much to dismantle this fragile facade. Hui Yanqing observed the scene from a distance, his gaze lingering on Xiaoya's tense posture. There was something about her that intrigued him, a quiet strength beneath the awkward exterior. He had seen her earlier, her face streaked with dirt, haggling with the vegetable vendors with surprising shrewdness. Now, surrounded by the glittering trappings of wealth, she seemed even more out of place, yet somehow, captivating. A pig farmer interesting. He pushed away from the wall, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He had a feeling this unexpected arrival would disrupt the carefully orchestrated balance of his world. Xiaoya felt a burning on her cheeks as the whispers followed her across the lobby. She could feel their judging eyes, stripping away her pretense, exposing her for the fraud she felt she was. They know, she thought, her stomach twisting. They know I don't belong here. She wanted to flee, to disappear back into the familiar anonymity of her farm, but she couldn't. Too much was at stake. She straightened her spine, reminding herself of the reason she was here, the secret she carried, the burden of her family's legacy. Jinfeng approached, her smile as sharp as broken glass. Wen Xiaoya, isn't it? Enjoying the city life? The words dripped with false sweetness, a thinly veiled taunt. Xiaoya met her gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. It's different, she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. Don't let her see your fear, she told herself. She wants to break you. Don't give her the satisfaction. Different indeed, Jinfeng purred, her eyes glinting with malicious amusement. I hope you're not too overwhelmed. City life can be complicated. She gestured vaguely towards the bustling lobby, her meaning clear. Xiaoya's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what Jin Feng was implying. The misplaced documents, the rumors circulating among the staff, these were not coincidences. This was a deliberate attempt to sabotage her. But why? What had she done to provoke such animosity? Hui Yanqing watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. He recognized the predatory gleam in Jin Feng's eyes, the subtle digs disguised as polite conversation. He had seen this tactic before, the calculated dismantling of a rival, and a sudden protectiveness towards the seemingly vulnerable Xiaoya rose within him. He moved closer, his presence a silent warning. Jin Feng's smile faltered slightly as Hui Yanqing approached. She shifted her attention to him, her voice taking on a softer, more seductive tone. Yanqing, darling, you're just in time. I was just welcoming our guest. Hui Yanqing nodded curtly, his eyes still fixed on Xiaoya. I see. He turned to Xiaoya, his voice a low rumble that cut through the ambient noise. Is everything all right, Miss Wen? The direct address, the unexpected concern in his voice, caught Xiaoya off guard. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of mockery, but found none. There was only a steady, unwavering gaze that seemed to pierce through her carefully constructed defenses. Yes, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He doesn't believe her, she realized, a surge of hope coursing through her. He sees through her lies. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the hotel entrance. A man, his face contorted in rage, was being restrained by security guards. He shouted incoherently, his words laced with accusations and threats. It was her. She set me up. She killed my parents. The lobby fell silent, all eyes turning towards the scene. Xiaoya felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized the man. It was Li Eru, a former employee of her family's farm. What was he doing here? What was he talking about? You asked Li Eru to ambush Wen Xiaoyan in the woods, a cold voice cut through the silence. It was Gao Peipei, her face pale, her hands trembling. She pointed a shaking finger at Zhao Jinfeng. You promised him money, you said you'd help him get revenge, but it was all a lie. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place in Xiaoya's mind. The ambush, the rumors, the misplaced documents, it was all orchestrated by Jin Feng. But why? What was her motive? Jin Feng's carefully constructed composure shattered. Her face twisted in rage, her voice a shrill shriek. You stupid girl! You ruined everything. Gao Peipei, fueled by fear and desperation, continued her confession. It was this woman, she cried, pointing at Jin Feng, who killed my parents. They worked for the Wen family, she silenced them to cover up her crimes. She wanted the Wen family's fortune, and now I own 60% of the Wen's shares. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The carefully constructed lies, the intricate web of deceit, unraveled in a matter of seconds. Hui Yanqing watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. He had suspected something was amiss, but the truth was far more complex, far more dangerous than he had imagined. He looked at Xiaoya, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She was no longer the awkward pig farmer, but the rightful heiress to a vast fortune, caught in a web of betrayal and conspiracy. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that their lives were now inextricably intertwined. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of pig feed that still clung to Xiaoya's clothes. The crisp white walls of the hospital corridor seemed to press in on her, each fluorescent light a stark reminder of the unfamiliar world she'd stumbled into. Her stomach churned, a disconcerting mix of nausea and apprehension. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, a dissonant symphony against the rhythmic beeping of a nearby heart monitor. Pregnant. The word felt alien, heavy with implications she hadn't yet begun to unravel. She ran a hand over her abdomen, a gesture both protective and bewildered. This tiny life growing inside her, a secret she now carried, felt like a fragile butterfly trapped in a storm. "Are you all right, Miss Wen?" Hui Yanqing's voice, a deep rumble, cut through her swirling thoughts. He stood beside her, a stark figure in his impeccably tailored suit, an island of composure in the chaotic sea of her emotions. His presence, usually unsettling, now offered a strange sense of stability. Xiaoya swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. I don't know." The words felt inadequate, hollow against the magnitude of the revelation. Internally, a whirlwind of anxieties raged. How could she, a simple pig farmer masquerading as a city sophisticate, possibly navigate the complexities of motherhood? What would this mean for her carefully constructed facade? And what of the child's father? The answer to that question was a tangled knot she wasn't ready to untangle, a truth she both cherished and feared. Hui Yanqing watched her, his gaze intense, searching. He saw the fear in her eyes, the subtle trembling of her hands. Beneath his carefully cultivated indifference, a flicker of concern ignited. He wasn't accustomed to such raw vulnerability, such unguarded emotion. It intrigued him, pulling him in like a moth to a flame. "This is unexpected," he finally said, the words carefully measured, yet laced with a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity? Curiosity? Or something else entirely? "Unexpected," Xiaoya echoed, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. She closed her eyes, momentarily overwhelmed. The image of Zhao Jinfeng's triumphant smirk flashed across her mind, a venomous serpent coiled and ready to strike. This news, this vulnerability, would be another weapon in Jinfeng's arsenal. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Across the corridor, Zhao Jinfeng stood concealed behind a large potted plant, her eyes narrowed, watching the exchange with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Her carefully laid plans, her meticulous machinations to discredit Xiaoya, suddenly seemed insignificant, childish even. This was a game changer. A child. With Hui Yanqing. The thought was a physical blow, a sharp stab of jealousy that made her breath catch in her throat. She clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. This couldn't be happening. Gao Peipei, hovering nervously beside Jinfeng, wrung her hands. "See? I told you something was going on," she whispered, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and fear. "This changes everything." Her mind raced, calculating the implications of this new development. Which side should she choose? Where did her loyalties lie? Self-preservation, as always, was her guiding principle. Xiaoya drew a deep breath, steeling herself. She opened her eyes, the fear replaced by a newfound resolve. She wouldn't be a victim. She wouldn't allow Jinfeng to use this against her. She would face this challenge head-on, just as she had faced every other obstacle life had thrown her way. "I plan to give birth to the child," she declared, her voice surprisingly firm, the words ringing with a conviction that startled even herself. The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. Hui Yanqing stared at her, his expression unreadable. A myriad of emotions flickered across his face: surprise, contemplation, and something akin to respect. He had underestimated this woman, this seemingly simple pig farmer. Beneath her unassuming exterior lay a strength, a resilience he hadn't anticipated. Zhao Jinfeng, hidden in the shadows, gasped. The audacity of it. The sheer brazenness. Xiaoya's declaration was a direct challenge, a slap in the face. She felt a surge of rage, a burning desire to retaliate, to expose Xiaoya for the fraud she believed her to be. Gao Peipei, sensing the shift in power dynamics, shifted her weight nervously from one foot to the other. This was getting complicated. Very complicated. She needed to tread carefully, to choose her words and actions with utmost caution. The stakes had just been raised. Xiaoya met Hui Yanqing's gaze, her own eyes unwavering. She saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken battle being waged. In that moment, a strange alliance formed, a fragile connection forged in the crucible of shared secrets and unforeseen circumstances. The sterile scent of the hospital, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the whispers and shadows all faded into the background as two worlds collided, their destinies intertwined in ways neither could have foreseen. The game had changed, and Xiaoya, the unlikely player, had just made her first move. The opulent chandeliers of the Jinhei Beiyuan Hotel seemed to mock Xiaoya's worn canvas shoes. Just hours ago, she had been knee-deep in mud, tending to her pigs. Now, she stood amidst a sea of silk and diamonds, the echoes of Zhao Jinfeng's accusations still ringing in her ears. Jinfeng's carefully constructed facade of innocence had crumbled, revealing a core of bitter envy. Xiaoya had never sought this life, this world of whispered secrets and veiled threats. Yet, here she was, the unwitting pawn in a game she barely understood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the forced composure she maintained. Just breathe, Xiaoya, she told herself, just breathe. Hui Yanqing's presence was a steady point in the swirling chaos. He stood beside her, an unreadable expression on his face. Throughout the ordeal, he had observed, silent and watchful, like a hawk assessing its prey. His silence had unnerved her more than Jinfeng's shrill accusations. What was he thinking? Did he believe her? Doubt gnawed at her, a persistent ache in her gut. Gao Peipei, her face drained of color, stammered out a confession, implicating Jinfeng in the scheme to sabotage Xiaoya. Each word felt like a stone dropping into a still pond, the ripples spreading outward, exposing the murky depths of Jinfeng's machinations. Xiaoya watched her, not with triumph, but with a strange sense of pity. This woman, driven by her own insecurities, had become a tool in a larger game, a game she couldn't possibly win. Jinfeng's carefully crafted mask of composure shattered. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around the room, searching for an escape route. The whispers started, the subtle shift in the crowd as they moved away from her, leaving her isolated in the vast, opulent space. The scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of champagne glasses seemed to amplify the silence that followed her outburst. It's over, Xiaoya thought, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. It's finally over. Hui Yanqing's voice, crisp and clear, cut through the tense silence. He addressed the gathered crowd, his words measured and calm, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. He laid out the facts, the evidence, the truth that Jinfeng had so desperately tried to conceal. He spoke not just as a CEO protecting his company's reputation, but as someone defending Xiaoya. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. The aftermath was a blur of apologies, explanations, and hushed conversations. Xiaoya found herself standing on the balcony, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. The city lights stretched out before her, a glittering tapestry of human lives, each with their own secrets and struggles. She felt a profound sense of disconnect, as though she were observing the world from behind a glass wall. Hui Yanqing joined her on the balcony. The silence between them was different now, no longer charged with suspicion, but with a strange, unspoken understanding. He leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the cityscape. "It's a different world from your farm, isn't it?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Xiaoya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He understands, she thought, surprised. He actually understands. No one is allowed to hurt Xiaoya again, he said, his voice low and intense. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. If I can survive, would you marry me? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. Xiaoya stared at him, her mind reeling. Marry him? This powerful, enigmatic man who seemed to exist in a world so far removed from her own. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. The life she had known, the simple, predictable existence on her farm, felt like a distant dream. This man, this moment, was pulling her towards an unknown future, a future filled with both danger and possibility. Her heart pounded against her ribs, echoing the city's restless pulse. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, something else was stirring, a flicker of hope, a spark of something more. This wasn't just about escaping the conspiracy, about clearing her name. This was about something deeper. A connection forged in the crucible of shared experience, a bond that transcended the vast gulf between their worlds. The city lights shimmered, reflecting in his dark eyes. She saw a glimpse of vulnerability beneath the carefully constructed facade, a hint of the man behind the CEO. And in that moment, she realized that the fear wasn't so overwhelming anymore. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could navigate this new world, this life of secrets and shadows. Perhaps, with him by her side, she could even learn to thrive. He's asking me to take a leap of faith, she thought, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. A leap into the unknown. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. The answer, she realized, had been there all along, buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. It was a whisper in the wind, a fragile bud of hope blooming in the darkness. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the city's hum. Yes, I will.